At the crowded 4th of July family barbecue, Aunt Brenda smiled over her paper plate. She told me it was wonderful how my little bakery was surviving the economy. Before I could even say thank you, the cold red wine hit my chest. It soaked through my cheap cotton shirt and ran down my jeans. Emily stood over me. She held the empty wine glass loosely in her hand and laughed. A loud, sharp sound that made the entire backyard fall silent. She looked at my stained shirt and told everyone it was an improvement on my pathetic wardrobe. I stared at her. I swallowed the lump in my throat and waited. I am 34 years old. For the last 6 years, I have worked 70-hour weeks, letting my family believe my little corner bakery was just barely keeping the lights on. It fed their egos to pity me. Emily took my quiet stare as a surrender. She turned her back to me, flipped her hair, and raised her voice for the rest of the yard to hear. She proudly announced her brand new title, Regional Vice President at Apex Resorts. The bragging escalated instantly. She leaned against the patio table, swirling her fresh drink, and laid out her master plan. Her very first act next week would be firing the entire senior housekeeping staff just before the holidays. She called them an eyesore. She claimed they ruined the luxury aesthetic of the brand. The real reason was pure greed. Clearing out those older salaries instantly guaranteed her a $30,000 performance bonus. Aunt Brenda gasped, asking how she even landed such a massive executive role at 26. Emily smirked. She took a long sip of her drink and confessed her crime, right in the middle of the barbecue. She had discovered the corporate hiring manager was hiding a very messy, very expensive affair in Vegas. One subtle threat later, the vice president title was miraculously hers. She wore the extortion like a badge of honor. My parents ate it up. My mother, Belinda, laughed and clapped her hands together. My father, Josh, actually pulled his checkbook out of his chest pocket. He wrote her a cash advance right there on the patio, explicitly telling her to buy a wardrobe that fit her new tax bracket so she wouldn't end up looking like her miserable older sister. They all watched me. They wanted a screaming match. They desperately wanted me to throw a tantrum so they could point their fingers and call me the jealous, unhinged failure. Power is absolutely silent. Insecurity is loud. Arguing with fools over paper plates of potato salad only diminishes your own value. I held my tongue and let them laugh. I was not cowering. I was simply watching my prey walk willingly into the slaughterhouse. I reached into my leather bag and pulled out a certified bank cashier's check. The crisp paper caught the afternoon breeze as I laid it flat on the patio table, right next to Emily's empty wine glass. The bold numbers across the center read $45,000. My mother stopped clapping. My father paused, his pen hovering over his own checkbook, staring at the bank seal like it was a mirage. I fed them the exact lie they craved. I told them I had taken out a second mortgage on the bakery. I described sitting in a cramped bank office, begging for a loan, draining my emergency fund, and risking my entire livelihood just to pay them off. Their faces lit up. It stroked their massive egos to believe I was bleeding myself dry. They loved the idea of my desperation. Then, I pulled out a thick stack of stapled papers and set it over the check. A full release of claims and equity forfeiture, meticulously drafted by my corporate legal team. I slid a black pen across the glass table. I kept my voice entirely flat. I told them the cash was theirs. On one condition. They had to sign away every legal and financial right they would ever have to me, my bakery, and my future assets. Emily snorted and called me a dramatic loser. My father just chuckled at my so-called sacrifice. He snatched the pen eagerly. My mother followed right behind him. They were so blinded by greed, so eager to bleed a failing baker dry, that they never even glanced at the fine print. They scribbled their signatures on the dotted lines and ripped the check from the table. I picked up the contract, folded it neatly into my bag, and walked out of the backyard. My shirt was still damp with cheap red wine, but the air in my lungs had never felt so clean. I got into my car, locked the doors, and dialed my lead corporate attorney. He answered on the first ring. I gave him 2 simple instructions. Let my sister sign the final executive contract on Monday morning, and make absolutely sure that $30,000 bonus clears her bank account. Monday morning arrived exactly as I planned. Emily walked into the glass-walled executive boardroom on the top floor of the Apex building. She wore the brand-new designer suit my father had funded. The lead human resources director handed her the final onboarding paperwork. A thick, binding employment contract. She grabbed the silver pen and signed her name on the dotted line. Seconds later, her phone buzzed against the polished mahogany table. A direct deposit notification flashed across the screen. $30,000. Her signing bonus had officially cleared. She smiled, picking up her phone to gloat. The heavy leather chair at the head of the table slowly swiveled around. I sat there, wearing a charcoal blazer, resting my hands flat on the table. My lead corporate attorney sat to my left. The head of human resources sat to my right. Emily dropped her phone. The heavy plastic clatter echoed across the quiet room. Her mouth opened, but only a sharp gasp escaped. The smug confidence drained instantly from her face, leaving her pale and rigid. I leaned forward. I kept my voice low and steady. I welcomed her to my company. Her eyes darted wildly between the lawyer and me, desperately searching for an escape route. She stammered my name, her voice cracking into a pathetic whisper. I slid a copy of her signed contract across the table. I tapped the morality clause she had just legally bound herself to. Then, I slid a printed stack of text messages right next to it, the exact messages she had used to threaten the hiring manager over his Vegas affair. I laid out the trap. She had used criminal extortion to secure a corporate officer position. Then, she willfully signed a legal document to receive $30,000 electronically. She had crossed a massive, irreversible line. It was no longer a petty workplace violation. It was federal wire fraud. Her hands began to tremble violently. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. The crushing weight of the trap shattered the last remaining ounce of her arrogance. The color completely drained from Emily's face, leaving her skin looking like wet ash. A thick, suffocating silence hung over the table before she finally snapped. She slammed her hands down hard and screamed for the hiring manager, demanding he come into the room and back her up. She still thought he was her human shield. She still thought she held all the cards. I looked at her, my expression completely flat, and dismantled her last defense. I told her the manager was already gone. I had visited him personally on Saturday night and given him a very simple choice. He could face the police for corporate extortion alongside her, or he could resign instantly with zero severance and hand over every single threatening text message she had ever sent him. He chose the latter. Panic fully took over. She lunged across the heavy mahogany table, her manicured fingers clawing desperately for the signed contract. The two security guards flanking the door immediately grabbed her shoulders and pulled her back. She thrashed against their heavy grip, her designer heels slipping wildly on the polished floor. While she fought them, I picked up my phone. With one tap, I authorized the corporate fraud alert to her bank. Her accounts were completely frozen. The guards dragged her out of the room. Her shrill screams echoed down the long corridor, growing fainter and fainter until the heavy steel elevator doors finally clamped shut. But a narcissist never simply accepts defeat. They double down. At 2 o'clock in the morning, driven to absolute, venomous madness, Emily drove straight to the disgraced manager's house. She pounded on his front door in the dead of night, completely unhinged. She threatened to wake his wife and expose the Vegas affair to his entire family right then and there, unless he did exactly what she wanted. She demanded he use his offline emergency vendor backdoor to log her into the resort's private mainframe. Terrified of his personal life blowing up, he complied. He logged in and handed her the laptop. Emily sat in the dark, frantically trying to download the ultra-exclusive VIP client list. She wanted to sell the data to our biggest competitor and bankrupt my entire company out of pure spite. She found the file. She clicked download. She expected a loading bar. Instead, she hit the honey token trap my security team had buried deep in the server. The laptop screen went entirely black. A fatal security lockout initiated immediately, capturing her exact IP address, logging her location, and freezing the hard drive permanently. The trap had perfectly clamped shut around her ankle. At exactly 10 o'clock the following morning, the local cybercrimes unit executed a felony search warrant at Emily's brand new luxury apartment. They breached the front door and systematically seized her phone, her personal laptop, and every piece of electronics she owned. The official charge was corporate espionage. 30 minutes later, my cell phone started vibrating across the flour-dusted counter of my bakery. The screen flashed my mother's name. I let it ring 4 times before I wiped the dough from my hands, picked it up, and hit accept. The sound of absolute, unfiltered hysteria poured through the speaker. My mother and father were both on the line, screaming over each other in sheer panic. They were sobbing uncontrollably, begging me to call my corporate lawyers off. They pleaded with me to drop the federal charges and save my little sister from a prison sentence. My father's voice cracked as he promised me they would pay the money back. My mother wailed that Emily was just a scared kid who made a foolish mistake. Even now, standing in the wreckage of her crimes, they were still trying to shield her from the consequences. I listened to their frantic breathing. I felt absolutely no pity. I felt no lingering anger. The crushing weight I had carried for my entire life was finally lifting off my shoulders. I leaned my back against the cold stainless steel prep table and spoke directly into the receiver. My voice was deadpan and quiet. I told them I had no sister. I reminded them that they had legally signed away all of their rights to me on Saturday afternoon for $45,000. They had eagerly sold their bloodline for cash, and now, Emily had to pay her own tab. I ignored my mother's next desperate sob. I pulled the phone away from my ear, ended the call, and permanently blocked both of their numbers. I set the phone face down. The commercial ovens hummed softly in the background. The warm, morning sunlight spilled across the rustic wooden floorboards of my kitchen. For the very first time in my 34 years, the silence in my bakery was absolutely beautiful. The legal process moved relentlessly once the federal investigators took over. 6 months after I hung up that phone, Emily stood in a wood-paneled federal courtroom. The judge handed down a sentence of 4 years in a state correctional facility for corporate espionage and wire fraud, with eligibility for parole after 36 months. The court also ordered a mandatory restitution fine of $42,000 to cover the investigative damages. The fallout extended far beyond the judge's gavel. The hiring manager she blackmailed filed his own civil suit, exposing the entire Vegas affair to his wife and his elite country club circle. Word spread like wildfire through our quiet hometown. My parents, who had spent decades bragging to the local church congregation about their brilliant, wealthy executive daughter, suddenly stopped attending Sunday service. The illusion they built their entire social lives upon shattered into a million irreversible pieces. They had to put a second mortgage on their house to pay Emily's defense lawyers, draining the exact equity I had forced them to sign away. A little over a year later, the afternoon mail carrier dropped a thin manila envelope on my bakery counter. The return address stamped in black ink belonged to a state correctional facility. Inside was a 3-page handwritten letter from Emily. She wrote about how much she missed our childhood family vacations. She complained that the food in the cafeteria was terrible, and the mattresses hurt her back. In the final paragraph, she claimed she forgave me for putting her in there, and asked me to deposit $500 into her commissary account because, deep down, we were still sisters. I read the entire letter while my morning batch of sourdough proofed in the back kitchen. I felt absolutely nothing. My pulse remained completely steady. I folded the 3 pages, dropped them straight into the stainless steel trash can, and went back to kneading my dough. There was no anger left to give her. My life today looks nothing like the tense, suffocating holiday barbecues of my past. My bakery expanded to a second location, right by the waterfront, and the corporate resort chain runs smoother than ever. Now, I spend my holidays hosting massive, chaotic dinners for the people who actually bring light into my world. My head baker brings her 3 young children, who run through my living room calling me Aunt Jenna. My corporate attorney brings his husband and their golden retriever. We sit around a massive oak dining table, pouring good wine, eating fresh bread, and laughing until our ribs ache. There is no walking on eggshells. There is no comparing paychecks, judging outfits, or tearing each other down just to feel tall. We protect each other. I traded a toxic bloodline for a chosen family, and the peace I gained is worth more than every dollar in my bank account. Looking back at the woman who stood silently while cold red wine dripped down her shirt, I realize exactly why I survived. If you are listening to this, and you are dealing with narcissists who constantly belittle your existence to inflate their own, you need to understand the reality of their hollow psychology. People like my sister build their entire identities on stolen titles, leased cars, and the validation of enablers. When you strip that away, they have absolutely nothing left. Remember these 3 rules. First, true power is completely silent, while insecurity is deafeningly loud. You never have to scream across a patio to prove your worth. You just have to outsmart them in the shadows. Second, financial independence is your greatest armor. The ability to look an abuser in the eye and know you do not rely on them for a single crumb is the ultimate freedom. Build your fortress quietly. And finally, sharing a bloodline with someone does not obligate you to endure their abuse. We are conditioned by society to protect our family at all costs. But cutting off a toxic relative is never a tragedy. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. Truth and peace will always outweigh DNA. You are completely allowed to walk away from people who hurt you, even if you share a last name. Who is currently draining your life under the disguise of family? And what are you waiting for to cut the cord? Let me know in the comments. I am Jenna, and I am finally free.